This video contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing. The techniques demonstrated are conducted by trained martial artists with the intent of understanding historical martial arts and techniques based on the works of Fiore de Liberi. Safety is paramount in these practices and should not be replicated without a trained martial arts instructor. Please do not try this at home.
Hello everyone, Kurt Olford here, and welcome back to another episode from Home Fighter Labs. Today we're going to be showcasing some of the footage that we got to do the other day in regards to training the deployment of arms after the lance, with the lance that's in hand, and if you're having a sword or a dagger on your body, and what it's like to utilize the lance in that capacity, as well as what happens when we lose the lance under different circumstances. So this video is going to be a little bit different because it is going to be broken down into segments. So you'll see me showcase the footage, talk about it, showcase the footage, talk about it, and then we'll wrap up in the end, towards the end, once we look at all the footage come together, because I think that this right here is going to be kind of the big takeaways we talk about. So this is the longer one. So this is one of those things where if you're just sitting down, relaxing, whatever, this isn't a quick video for you to kind of digest into. So please sit back and hope that you get to enjoy all of this. We're going to be looking at some of the things that happen, like I said, when it comes down to sharp weapons against spears or lances, and then also what happens in other situational categories that happen when the lance is lost under duress, and other things about that. We'll also be talking about some technology pieces out there in regards to what we see within some pieces of equipment, and then also essentially how we can, and why they may have been done in certain ways, and some of my theories about that. So with that being the case here, before we kick into this, a few things first and foremost. Please do not try this at home. This was not a fight or fighting situation. This is a range, what I call a range. We had safety implementations in place. We have people that are not, it's constant observation, it's constantly talking, it's constantly communicating. So please don't try this at home. This isn't a fighting situation. This is us trying to understand and experience certain things within the manuscript that carry over into this. So please don't keep that in mind here. With that being the case here, if you're new to the channel, also please like, subscribe, share with a friend out there. We want people to look at this. We're very curious about this practice of our Mitsari, and we're looking at some of the more diverse concepts of the manuscript here, and I'm going to break it out even further. So if you're new here, please join us on this journey here. Share so we can have others come with us. And if you're my viewers and subscribers, thank you so much for tuning in as always. So with that being the case here, we're going to take a look at the first sequence of operations that we're talking about, because like I said, this is broken down into segments of footage. And I'm also going to scroll across the screen right here as I'm talking here, like what concepts we're looking at, and we'll break that down further as we go further into this. This first portion of what we're looking at here is utilizing what it is like to have the lance taken away and to defend against it, and what may be necessary to do that when you have a sharp tool of war. And the whole point of this right here is to, once again, to experience how to contain and constrain something that is coming at you, and why the swords in two-hand section may actually offer us other things that are potentially powerfully beneficial for this kind of situation, and how to contain it further based on that. So with that being the case here, we'll kick into it.
So again, regardless of if we have either a sword with two hands, one hand, it doesn't matter. All we're looking at here is contending, binding across, and feeling what it's like to strike against and use footwork against the lance. So for demonstration purposes, one more time here. Aaron. So case here. Good. So however you want to stand, my suggestion is to be in mezzo portiferro or dente di figaro. The reason being here is you can play to either side. Now, systematically, just make the position of extension. We know that we talk about here, this takes away both rabat and places the inside. If I play here, he has the opportunity to come across and strike with the rabat. So it really comes down to your choice of what you're doing with this and what you're trying and how you want to contend. So by being a Mesoportifero and Dentivicigaro, which just makes a lot of sense to talk about thrown weapons, because now there's really nothing in my arms. You can tell right here, like it's very, here I'm pushing forward, this is uncomfortable, but here, it makes all the sense in the world why I'm in this position, okay? So the first thing we're gonna do here is, again, he's not thrusting, and we are not attacking back. The whole point here is to contend with the lance. So he thrusts in, coming up with this right here, trying to make sure we bind it and I press off one. Good. Down. And the goal right here is try to put a little bit of bite into this. Now try pulling. Just retain this right here, which is enough to be able to get opportunities. For the other side, same kind of concept here. So this is the theme that we're talking about tonight, about getting in and out. So in this right here, it doesn't matter either side of this. The whole point is all I'm going to be doing is doing this, right? If he goes into it, you need to really aggress wide as possible, make posta frontale, which by the way, this is really kind of cool because this is where like frontale and suture portifero are connected. So by coming in here, here comes the thrust, like really bind hard up against, here, this, now drive down, but bite against, because I can still pull this. Okay?
How do you use to bite in that situation?
When you walk, so when I come across this here, in, like don't just cross,
Hit it.
cross.
Got it.
So when you're coming in right there?
That.
Okay.
Now keep the pressure, don't let go. Now it's stuck in. Good, he's out. Excellent. And you can tell like how effective that is. This is also one of the reasons why I think we have lines like pole axes. Okay, so thrust. And this is bad because the blade is right there.
Yeah.
This goes right back. And also here, this is where you can start, step across, step on the tip. And now we're right into the sword, against the binding against the sword plays. I can't pull out of this. Now here he can't step, but he can do the breaking of the sword play where he goes to the hands. Okay? Yep. And because, yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially as a lefty, yeah, that's perfect. Okay. Now in this case, you're on the tip.
Yeah.
If you can get across to step on that,
Yeah.
yep.
Drive in to step.
Yep. Let's give it one more shot. Now it's there. It's right there in the face. Very nice. See how this changes?
It's still really far
Yep.
here.
And I don't think I think that you're playing it very well. Like this right here is very close to like reality. Like a visorless helm.
How close do you want to get?
Yeah.
How close do you really want to get to this, right?
Yeah.
Because I
And
think
it's also a reach thing.
Yeah. So
Driving in.
yeah. Maybe with that frontale, step in and cross on that too.
So
When you cross in,
cross in, step.
yeah, try that. See what happens there.
Okay.
Yeah, I gave you a little bit more of a.
I did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And there's a decent bite there.
Cool.
Interesting. Because when you put it into the ground.
Right. I mean, that happened with me too, but at the same time too, like the tip of this is so narrow,
Yeah.
you'd be able to rip that right up. There. Now you can step it, put the blade back down. You have that right there, and there's all the points off. Good. Good. Excellent. Now one more time. Good. Yeah. Don't let go of that though. Keep that. This is actually really cool because like it teaches like maintain that structure, because if I start jerking away with this, okay, so I won't, this right here, so step off. So do that again, bite hard. That. And how much I slip back right there, like this is not fun for me, right? Okay. Right there, very nice. That's really interesting to go loose bite.
So as you can see with the footage out there, again, we're not fighting. This is just the first implementation portions of driving a lance towards something and then using a sharp sword to bind against the wood portion and to drive it to the ground. Mind you, in this case right here, this is more about the experience of what it takes to drive that to the ground. And, you know, we're not saying that this is exactly all the things that would be happening there, and we don't know how someone would respond in reality when it comes down to these types of practices. So, and I say that because, you know, in some cases, I mean, I certainly was bent over to kind of contain the lance, which would have been very easy for the attacker to really jump at me and to take me, which is one of the reasons why we were experimenting with the play of stepping on the sword, as is shown in the sword in two hands. But we're talking about that right there because we're utilizing that wide segment of movement to bind and cross against, utilizing various posta of the sword in two hands, and to bind it down to the ground and then to step on top of the spear tip. I have with me right here, this is actually the spear itself. I don't know how well it's going to be, but you can see how nicked up this was. There are several pieces in here, like this one here specifically is a really nasty gouge where this bit in deep. Some of these really have like pretty deep bites from just that sword. And mind you, those are long swords made by Ronin Katana. I've used them for other examples here. But you can see how, once again, the bite mark and crenellations in this right here, it held very fast in that kind of context of use. I'm not trying to go against the spearhead because, again, this is metal and it's rounded. And that's actually going to be a big piece right here I'm going to talk about in a second, because this kind of rounding piece right here, you may have seen in there, there's a couple times where like there's one little nick right here, but it slid right off. And that didn't really buy me a lot, especially because it's not much surface area. If anything, it slid and bit into the wood, which became an opportunity for me to be able to step in, or somebody else to step on the lance, and then to work the sword against the person or adversary. This brings me to a concept of technology out there that I've been really, really thinking about quite a bit. And this is, although this is not a lance, this is a poleaxe, and I have my safety studs on here because this is a very nasty device right here, made by Arms and Armor. Fantastic piece of equipment. And this right here is their Bec de Corbin, which I believe is pretty close to Fiore's, like the axe that he may have been using in that time. This is both a spear, hammer, axe. It's a canoper on the end right here, and it's very, very, very light. Now, interesting right here, we have these metal strips that go down the side called languets. And one of the things that I hypothesize quite often about this is, why do we have these things? Today, you know, there's lots of stuff that show, like, you know, drilling holes through wood takes away a lot of the structure from this. And I'll tell you that I believe that that's a huge portion of this. Now, why would we have languets in the side of this as far as like a poleaxe? And also we see them in sometimes with spears and lances and other things out there. So what's the purpose of them? My hypothesis is that essentially, if someone's biting down on wood, you can rotate this across very easily because it's more or less, even if it's a square or cubicle, it's still able to rotate quickly in the hands, and you can move it to a piece of metal, which allows you to get the edge off. And in that case right here, denies the binding actions which you saw within the footage right there of the sword coming down on the lance. And again, remind you, we're not fighting in that situation. So we're not test bedding this into a life and death situation. And those swords, as sharp as they are, they're not the sharpest. And that's a big part also to keep in mind when it comes down to using these things. But I will tell you that, and I want to find a good model to work with. I don't want to do with this. This is a good piece of equipment. I want to find something here where we can test that biting down into the wood and then rotating it off into a languet, which allows the blade to slip. And that might be a reason why I think that these things are on there. especially when you're talking about poleaxe against sword plays, where Fiore does talk about, he makes mention in one section about, using the colpo volano essentially to come down and strike against the axe. If I had a sword, I would do the same thing. I can't see this as being very different, and that you're utilizing the lightness of the blade to come off and to get to a certain pot, either on the person or the sword or their arms, into an advantageous position. So that first position right here, again, like that's a lot of talk about the technology, about the usage of tools, and also a lot of the other things that come around from like opportunities. So that was just the first portion right here. And in the next sequence we're going to be talking about here is like I show this clip here of the guy holding the spear in the lance section, because we talk about something in our practice called the practitioner of arms sparring, which essentially is where you have a sword and dagger and you're using a lance. And you can be in any level of kit based off of the safety constraints that you want to have on there, as far as for speed and whatnot, and also the equipment. But we look at this because just using the lance itself is very different when you are armed, beyond just wearing a dagger. And we like to explore that because we do think that that's another part that is a huge part of this practice of this martial art. After that here, we're going to look at ways in which we deploy to the secondary spots. This is where I've talked about before about making the workspace and looking at like the sword in one hand or the dagger place. And we didn't have daggers this time, but same thing could have been happening within this concept. So we then utilize an offline situation to be able to draw if the lance is bit down like we did before, and you'll see how that does in the video, to be able to find a secondary weapon that you may have on your side, dagger or sword, and to be able to continue to fight and not just be lost based off the thrust. So with that being the case here, let's take a look at what that looks like.
So what we're doing here is we're looking at, first and foremost, when you have a lance, like what it's like to have arms on and everything else, just to first and foremost experience that. So before anything happens, give yourself some space and just explore the movement of like everything we've done. But now you have an arming sword on there, so you can kind of see how that feels and places well too.
Like so?
Yeah. So the next phase of this though is we're going to start looking at what happens if someone binds this right here, and can you find your arms in the process. So you're going to be facing towards this portion of the range over here. You're going to extend out. I'm going to be over here. The reason what we're doing here is all you're going to do is extend. I'm going to take the poleaxe. I'm going to push this over to create that break. It's going to go to the ground, and you're going to reach over to find the sword. So remember, if this right here works depending on my size. So if I am a right forward position, it breaks down with this. Here out, the sword is right there at my waistline, right? If I am on a left foot forward right here and it breaks down, it's fine in that spot here. So the first phase of this right here is just find your arms as it breaks down. All you're gonna do is hold this position. I'm gonna push it and push it down. You're gonna go with the turn and find your sword, okay? Over and down. Yep, good.
Other side?
Yep. Okay. First one. Okay. Second one. Okay. All right. So extension. This is going to be interesting because it's going into your sword side, right? Okay. Right?
Yep.
Right?
Ready?
Good. Okay. And
That's interesting. You may lose
you might lose it, yeah.
both.
Cool.
That's an interesting case of that's when you might go into absolute. Because if you retain here,
Yeah.
you may be moving into, oh no, here, recover.
Yeah, and the thing is too is like, so right now I'm using an axe, but we have no idea what this person's going in here. So the idea is probably better step back out of place it is so that wherever you draw becomes optimal. So feel what it's like to have an arm, the arm to that capacity. So in this next phase, all we're doing here is you extend out. As you get pushed, you're going to find the handle. Don't worry about drawing it. All right. Extend. Okay. Extend. Okay. Good. Extend. Good. Extension. Break down. Break down. Drop. I appreciate how you actually use post along in the ditch. Break down. Good. Break down. Good. Excellent. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. All right. Excellent. Cool.
So as you can see with the footage, again, like all we did was like, so we're utilizing a training lance. And as this comes out, the person, one of us is pushing with a pull axe to the side to simulate the same things we did before because we want to be out of the way of somebody drawing the sword. Now, a few things about this right here that, people may, interpret or explore on their own, and we definitely encourage that in your own training capacities. Would you run forward or run back? A lot of the times in this situation, my answer is it depends. And because ideally, depending on what side the lance is on the body here, and where your sidearm is at and what's available right there, that may change everything that's happening for you. For example, if I get broken down and my sword's over here, well, the lance is coming across the body, which pins it down, which makes it harder. In order to free me here, I can turn into that. I can step back and turn into that and then pull. But now I'm in a spot where I'm kind of disadvantageous for it. It's much easier for me to come across, ditch it, and to pull out in different directions. And again, this is, it's not that it's like an end-all be-all stop, but it is a moment in time for that person with the sword, which is, in this case, a faster device, to be able to get that thing back on target as fast as possible, because I am willing to get the lance freed or the secondary arm freed in practice. All of that right there is just, again, a look at how we can explore why the posta and our other positions, like the sword in one hand or dente di chingaro of the dagger, why are those positions right there? And again, for me, I don't think of them as just like, okay, these are standing positions. Because like I'd like to tell people in my classes, there's a play that's before every last one of these situations. And it's the person successfully hitting the person, right? So avvisamento and awareness is a big part about this. You don't make dente di chingaro, like walk around with a knife out. You get arrested or killed for that in a historical context. So that means that you had to make it. And in those spaces, I believe we're looking at a sword in one hand position to get out, to create other positions, as well as a sword or a dagger to be able to get out and then to work into other grappling positions. And that's all this was here is exploring, because once again, how do we do that? One thing that I'd like to put back here also, because I did this quite extensively with this group and myself, is that essentially this kind of like play, when you're talking about a live arm and not a blunt or plastic or any type of sword, there is a huge, that's where training is important. Which is why you look at dente di chingaro, why the dagger might be wide. Like, you don't want that near to your body in case someone slams up against you and now you just stabbed yourself. So a lot of the stuff that happens with live arms is it becomes incredibly, like really, really, really incredibly like interesting about how much you can draw, but also how aware and close to everything is. There's almost like this space of like, I don't want to get too close because this is for real. And yeah, if I may be in armor, but I'm closed down on somebody, that still can come back and hit me. So there's almost like this little bit of pause of everyone's kind of hollowing out a little bit so as to not get struck in certain ways. Or for people in armor to then position themselves in ways so that if the blow does come up, it's deflected in the optimal way so that you can continue fighting in other ways. So there's a little bit of headspace change right here, especially if when we're talking about drawing and finding things, because you can't look at these things under duress. And that's another thing too that's very hard to simulate, because you're talking about a sharp device here. And if you draw wrong, you'll cut your hand apart. And that's very possible. So this next sequence of operation here puts all the training together, but in an aggressive system. So in this, what I mean by here by aggressive is that essentially here, the lance is being taken away because it is made, it's lodged in point, and it has gone past in certain areas, and it's lodged in, and it's now being utilized to turn the body in different form and direction. This right here is going to be putting all the training that we put together here previously into work and focus. And you'll see how essentially, the idea right here is like we're talking about where to hit on something first and foremost, but also the effects that happens when that goes that way, and how you may not be able to pull that lance out. So now what do you do? Well, we'll take a look at this and how we apply apprezzare, dagger play, sword play, and the lance play all together to really build up a pretty nasty situation that I believe really is the totality and meaning of fighting in armor. So let's roll the script.
If it's front forward on this right here, just to turn this around, this kind of rotation goes right into the shoulder, which is why we're not talking about that. So don't aim for the plate on this one right here. We're just going to basically utilize, once again, these are hips and armpits. So whatever position you have, the goal is drive, find the point. So this is where your point matters. So just like we broke over before, if I come over here, if I stick this hip and I come this way, the body is going this way. So this is driving their body away from me, which allows me to get into the other side. So I'm using the drive of the lance to drive and offset. If I have it, great. If I don't, I'm either going to go for my sword or my dagger. This is a blunt one. This is where an arming sword is way better than a fucking long sword. This is a lot to pull out. So I actually might, on mine, I'm going to do a few of this just to show, but I might swap out with thorn for the last bits of it. Again, this goes to the point where, like, so the thing is, do I think that the person underneath there is not feeling that pressure? Absolutely, I think they're feeling it, but are they feeling it blow all the way through their body? No. And again, this is all the point. I'm not trying to break chain. Yeah. I'm trying to push this to the point where it becomes painful against that person. So if you're could you imagine they give a gambeson like that plus chainmail? Now you might not feel some of these.
You're pretty robust at that point.
Yeah.
Because that was here, drive in itself. Like there it went through because the fabric's deteriorated, like through all the layers.
Right.
Yeah.
It's sticking. I can't imagine like sword in one hand thrust.
If you look at the point, you can see that it's getting bunched up in the layers.
Yeah.
And it's stopping.
Yeah.
The thrust.
This is what you were talking about last time, where like the cross stitching that basically pulls the thrust upwards and outwards completely out of the direction.
Yeah.
Person squared up to you still with that thrust.
Well, like if I'm here, right?
Yeah.
And I drop it before I might want to keep hand on here, then transition
Yeah.
to go in here, and then to go into the arm.
Yeah. The other thing too about this is we're not actually getting the simulation of the person doing this and falling forward if you actually get them in the right spot, you know?
Yeah.
So that right there, and that's a wise thing, because the reality is that's the best case scenario versus like.
On the inverse of that, you have the falling back too, where maybe they just trip as they turn away from pain and then have to go straight up.
Right.
Yeah.
Half the time.
Half the time.
You're good. Because in here, I might transition to cover that line. And then come in.
Going into it. That's what I was talking about, like plow into them. Don't go back to master distance. Where if you like hop up and over, there's no reason to do anything else. You just
So as you can see with the video, again, this is a very aggressive. And I mean, like I said before, this takes, and again, I'm going to say it again, please don't try this at home. The people that do this have had hundreds, if not thousands of hours of like handling and working and drawing and practicing this. This is not something that we just got to do like as a fun day or whatever. Like, no, this is practiced extensively. So please don't try this at home. What I really want to talk about here is, again, if you saw in there, I talk about how we're looking at armpits and hips. A couple things, like, you know, there's a special that I put out there before as a range day where myself and Connor were utilizing a rubber tipped Purple Heart partisan, and we're doing essentially this right here, but with each other, and that essentially we're putting it into the hip and we're driving through. Now, depending on what you believe in this or not, one thing that does happen is that once you hit in certain spots, so this is why I looked at point testing, I had another special on that, and then doing this right here earlier on, is that even though armor is very, very, very good, it has seams, it has weak points, and if you do get it into the spot that you want it at, it's going to create an opportunity to turn into wrestling. And that's one of the reasons why I think that Fiore's manuscript is all about wrestling and understanding where lines of return come, is because when you turn the person, if you are effective in turning the person, that right there is how you get to some of the deeper, more nasty things that happen probably in the chivalric art of arms. So again, putting that lance into the hip, and I've shown this here in certain specials out there in certain seminars. If I put that point onto someone's hip right here, and I'm talking about like it was like a plastic or whatever sword, and they're wearing like spec pants. I push a little bit into that. Their first response is to hollow out and go in to give way into where that hip is hit. And I can't blame them. Now, if you take that as making a sharp device, like a lance or something, and I bring up my Bector Corbin right here, because again, this right here looks broad, but as you start to narrow this down here, this becomes incredibly narrow. And there's other ways in which you can really make this thing work. Now, mind you, again, this is a Bector Corbin, not a Lanza. But the application is still true. And if I hit a person in the hips and I start to turn them away from themselves, I'm creating third master dagger concept where I can fall on the body. So for my training purpose of what I was doing in sequence-wise, all I was trying to do was move in, hit a hip, drive that lance in as deep as I possibly can, lodge it, and as I turn the body, I'm going to utilize the same skills we practiced earlier about if the lance gets taken away to drive that wide, collapse, utilizing dagger play as far as, the concept of making third master dagger, falling onto the arms, making posta longa, and being able to draw my sword so I might point it again and find another opening. And I think it's one of the things right here that is very brutal about this, is because it is very fast and it's very lethal. So once it happens, you can't let go. So oftentimes, in sparring situations, we talk about like making a point and backing out. And we certainly do the same thing too. It's when it comes down to like unarmored stuff, because it's very hard not to do that. Aim lethally, hit him quickly, and then back out, and then cut him down on the way back. But in armor, you want to keep that stick point in there, and your whole point is to try to drive them so that they start turning their body. Like I said, if we look at all the images of stuff we have run across this play right here, I'm sorry, this video right here, we've seen everything from like how a lance is being utilized to the breaking of the sword down to stepping on top of it, remembering about the sword in one hand and two hands, but also the portion right here about I'll push your elbow, I've stabbed you several times, but your armor preserved you with the sword and armor section. And with a push of the elbow, I work to see if your backside is armored. That's what this last one is really about. And that right there really kind of brings together the totality of this, is that if you've made your point, okay, the armor's preserved him thus far, keep driving till it doesn't, and then get to a point where his armor is no longer as beneficial. And if I turn them towards the backside, armor is really not beneficial, because now it's weighting them down and they're falling into a different direction. So as we get closer and further into the episodes that happen here, when we get into the armor sections, I start talking about how the body starts doing this as far as body structure. There's going to be a lot of stuff right there that is going to be important for us to remember, especially with how we fight somebody in that consideration. The last thing I really want to say about this piece right here is that this kind of practice right here, to me, not only explains the importance and the reason and purpose as to why Abrazari is so foundationally important and why effective strikes is necessary to learn. When we look at effective strikes, we talk about turning the body. Many, many times when it comes down to training, we have this every time we work with a new group, or if I talk to people abroad. Why can't I get the technique to work? My answer is simple. It's because you're trying to touch to a place. You're not trying to hurt the person, which is to be celebrated and commemorated and absolutely understood. That's a beautiful thing. But if you're trying to talk about understanding why a technique works, it's important to understand that these strikes are meant to hurt the person. They're meant to make it so that they try to turn away with pain aversion, which allows for optimal situations. So every dirty, nasty trick that we've learned up and from Abrazari to dagger to sword and beyond, and we talk about all the spots where we get hit in the body. That is what makes this thing and changes the body in such a way that allows the person in this period of time to be effective in training. So when it comes down to training with dagger and stuff like this, it comes to a point where you have to understand that it is, or I say dagger, but because dagger is one of those spots where a lot of those effective strikes really come out. You have to understand that training with that is very important, to understand that hitting a certain spot, you're not necessarily just going to muscle through that. I'm sorry. It doesn't work that way. And if you are, well, then the other person is setting themselves up to continue to constrain that person. This last bit that they said before, like I said, working against the bag, is the same thing. If the person's chainmail is double layered or something along those lines, and I stick in that spot as deep as I possibly can, and it's not doing anything but turning their body because the weight against chainmail, well, they're not going to stop fighting, but they're also not necessarily going to stop turning. And because they can't stop turning, now I've got a way to utilize that effective strike to an area that would put somebody down a different direction to work to another spot to contain and constrain the outcome of the event. If you look at those thrusts or those lances, once they're made in, they are made with purpose and to drive purchase on a target. And when they hit a target, I then drive everything forward into this. If there's any question out there before, it's like, well, why would I ever stab like that with a lance? Because you have to make it hurt. And I'm not saying, and for the purpose of sport and for practice in the yard, I'm talking about the historical aspects of the time. And that's perhaps one of the things out there that is so hard to replicate, because we don't want to do that to one another, which once again is to be celebrated and appreciated. So with that being the case here, again, I'm going to close off with one last time. Please don't try this at home. Leave a comment if you have questions on this below here. Again, this was not meant for people to go out there and try to spar with or anything like this. The people doing this right here know what we're doing here. We've had lots of hours with it. And we also understand that when it comes down to the applications from day one to day where we're at right now, it's a constant understanding of the evolution. Please don't try it at home. And again, I'm very curious to hear what people have to say or think about this, because I do think that this kind of work right here brings the works of Fiore to life. Because as I've said before, and I know some people don't like it, well, I can understand that, because I was also, where I was at within my martial practice. Fiore's manuscript is not a fencing manuscript. Fiore's manuscript is a combatives one. It is made what we may understand as fencing today is there, but the reality is the sword just became your fist, became your fingers, everything else. The sword became a hand, a multiplier, just like the dagger, the lance, and the axe. And you are never not doing apprezzare or seeking the same effective strikes. And that really is what it concludes with all this. So let me know what you're thinking out there. And as always, everybody, please, thank you so much for stopping by. And until I see you, be safe out there, train well, fight on. I'll see you all soon.